So good morning or afternoon, depending on when you are listening to this or watching this. So I'm Eve and I'm Strategic Director of GM Moving, and I'm going to be the host of this new series of mini webinars and podcasts that we're running as GM Moving. So as part of us adapting what we do and how we do it in light of the challenges of COVID-19, we're experimenting with different ways to convene people so we can continue to share our learning, our reflections, our tips of leading, learning, connecting and staying active in GM. So this is intended as part of our offer to the ecosystem to help us all to hopefully live well, work well, care for each other and keep active at this time. So I'm really delighted that we're kicking off this series with Rene, who's absolutely fabulous, and she has very generously gifted her time and expertise to us today. In the spirit of learning as we go, it's the first time I believe that Rene has used Zoom or indeed done any online virtual training. So we're very grateful that she was up for giving it a go. And I'm going to hand it over to you. All right, over to you, Rene.
Hi everyone, great to be with you this morning. Given the circumstances that we're all finding ourselves in, thought it might be useful to put together a few thoughts to support people, to give them a chance to think things through emotionally while we've got so much upheaval and turmoil going on in our lives. Quite a number of people have been saying to me recently that they felt a heightened level of anxiety, almost an underlying kind of dread. Because none of us have been here before, none of us know what to expect, and so we're finding our feet, walking our way smoothly together with it really. So I wanted to just put some thoughts down. Seems to me the situation we're in is very different than anything we found ourselves in before. There are multiple unknowns, it's really complex, it's quite threatening, it's very unpredictable, and the advice is changing constantly. So it's really hard to come to some conclusions for ourselves about what's going on. I think most of us are taking on board all the important advice that's being given to us to help prevent the spread of the virus. But I think we do need to pay some similar attention to our own emotional health during this period. So whilst we're doing all the practical stuff, there's lots going on for us internally as well. Some people are asking me, is it normal to experience a greater level of anxiety? And I think it really is. Our natural biological response to this kind of threat is to feel worried and anxious, part of our alert system, so that we can be vigilant and take on board and respond to the potential dangers that we're finding in front of us. And some anxiety is therefore really helpful because it means we will pay attention to the guidance, we will be washing our hands and we will be being careful about staying at home and avoiding lots of contact with others. So some anxiety is okay. It's really legitimate and helps us respond appropriately. But then we need to think about the extremes, and that can go one of two ways really. Some people might be very unconcerned, and so they're likely to disregard the public health advice that's around us. And other people might become so worried that they enter into panic buying and actually start to catastrophize about the situation. So I think it is normal, and linked to all of the uncertainty, we've also got this whole issue of our normal routines are being disrupted. Closure of schools, gyms, places that we visit fairly regularly. And our brains have a stability bias. So not only are we wired to be negative, we're also wired to respond to routines. So all of our routines are disrupted at the moment for lots of people. And that's been really tested. In addition to all of that, we've also got this massive flood of information. Everything we look at, social media, the TV, everything coming at us, and it's all negative. So there's a temptation to want to keep checking, and that means we're overloaded a lot with all the negative stimulation. Given all of that, I thought it'd be really helpful to do a quick reminder for people about some of the very basic things that we can do in the circumstances. Now, what is it that we can do to protect ourselves emotionally during this really, really difficult time? And for me, it's about going back to quite a lot of the work that some of you will be aware of from Barbara Fredrickson. Barbara Fredrickson, Professor of Psychology, North Carolina University, has spent the whole of her working life analysing, researching, evidencing, proving the kind of things that we can do to protect our emotional well-being, particularly during times of great uncertainty. And her work, some of you will know, encompasses this whole concept called Psychoneuroimmunology. Really, really long word, but really simple to understand once you start unpacking it. And her work around psychoneuroimmunology focuses on exploring the links between our mood, the psychology, what goes on in our brains, the neuro bit, and how that impacts on our immune system. So she's looked at work that focuses on our mood, behaviours, physical and mental health, and our longevity. And so it is particularly relevant at the current time. So what is psychoneuroimmunology? Well, fundamentally, it's about how, depending on what we're feeling, whether that's good or bad, our bodies release different neurochemicals. So when we feel good, when we feel upbeat, when we feel engaged, when we feel happy, shorthand, our brains release copious amounts of these three really, really good neurotransmitters. Some of you will relate to these words immediately. They're part of the endorphin family. So they're good neurotransmitters for our mental and emotional well-being. We get them in two main ways. The first way is what I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about, which is about mood. It's about how do we shift away from worry and anxiety. And the second main way that we enhance our production of these neurotransmitters is exercise. And clearly, just at the moment, that's going to be particularly important given the restrictions on our ability to go to the gym, etc. And GM Moving have already produced some really, really useful information to help people exercise and to physically move during periods of self-isolation. So things that you can access. And if you look at the GM Moving website, there's lots of information on there to help you. Now, what are these three good neurotransmitters? Well, the first one I want to talk about is oxytocin. Some of you will know it's called the love drug or the cuddle drug. It's the chemical we release when we're in love, when we're all loved up. It's the chemical we release when we stroke anything, dogs, cats, guinea pigs, rabbits, ferrets, whatever does it for you. It has to have a heartbeat. But when you stroke anything, your body produces lots of oxytocin. And the third way, some of you might have heard of it, is the chemical breastfeeding mothers release when they're bonding with their babies. So how do you produce more oxytocin? We're going to look at that. Dopamine, most of you will have experienced if you've ever eaten too much chocolate. If you've had a really, really, really big bar of chocolate, you will feel a sugar rush, and that is dopamine triggering in your brain. Other ways to trigger dopamine, not so healthily: alcohol, smoking, gaming produces lots of dopamine, and our use of social media. So there are good ways to get dopamine, and there are less good ways to get dopamine. And serotonin, most of you will know, is linked to Prozac or other SSRIs or other antidepressants. And at any time in our lives, any of us might need to take a medical supplement that helps us retain serotonin. It's perfectly legitimate. That happens to lots of people all the time. Now, the view is that if we're going to stay mentally and emotionally well, part of our proactive activity, things that we choose to do, should be about helping our brains release three of these really good neurotransmitters. And there are two main ways to do that. I've already said exercise and mood. And I'm going to focus on mood. Now, the other thing I ought to mention is that as well as our brains choosing to release really good neurotransmitters, there are times in our lives when our brains choose to release a very negative kind of chemical called cortisol. It's sometimes called the stress hormone. Some of you will have heard of that. Now, at the moment, my suspicion is that because of the underlying dread that some of us have got, and this kind of heightened anxiety that we're carrying, we're probably producing more cortisol than we would do under normal circumstances. So part of what we need to do is to think through, how can I make choices? What can I do during these really different times to help my brain choose to release more of those good neurotransmitters and to suppress our production of cortisol? That's what I want to try and talk through with you. Now, let's do a bit of practical stuff. Just for a few seconds, I want you to reflect back on your day so far, wherever you are in the day. I want you to reflect back on your day so far and just think about what are the good things that have happened to you already today. Now, naturally, some of you may be thinking, not very much has happened good to me today. Actually, I can't really think of anything. Perfectly natural, because our brains are wired to pick up and notice on the things that haven't gone so well for us today. So if you have, I don't know, one of your kids has been upset this morning, or you've not been able to get a slot for the delivery of your groceries from Sainsbury's or some other supermarket, you will start to feel a heightened anxiety. So your brain doesn't choose to pick up and focus on the good stuff. Your brain chooses naturally to focus on the negative things. But if you really dig deep and think about your day up to now, there are probably some really good things that have happened to you. So, for example, you might have had a really lovely cuddle off one of your kids. Your first cup of tea or coffee this morning would have given you a nice sensation waking up. You might have had a nice text off a friend, or you might have even had an opportunity to walk outside in the beautiful blue sky that we've got today. So when we dig deep and we think about and reflect on our days, we do notice the good stuff. So our brains are very like Velcro when it comes to things that trouble us and worry us, but they're very like Teflon when it comes to good things. So we have to work harder at noticing the good things. Now, part of Fredrickson's research tells us the best way to stimulate more of those 3 good neurotransmitters is to think about your positive emotions. And here are a very famous list that some of you will be familiar with, the top 10 list of emotions. And her research shows us that when we take proactive steps to recognise, to focus on, to notice and to savour things that evoke these emotions for us, then our brains definitely release those 3 neurotransmitters much more naturally. So one of the things that we need to think about is, how do I get more of these things despite things being as difficult as they are just at the moment? And that isn't going to happen naturally. We actually have to put proactive energy into making it happen. So the trick is to learn to notice and savour the good things that are happening to us, but that which most of the time we don't even notice. So I'm encouraging you to think about, how do I make sure I'm noticing and savouring these things as I live through my day? Now, there are lots of ways of doing that. Sorry. Lots of ways of doing that. What you need to do is savour those experiences. Because if you're enjoying cappuccino or scoffing your lunch, you know there's a big difference between those two things. So how do we learn to stop the scoffing in its broadest sense and learn to savour much more effectively? And that's about slowing down. It's about taking the time. It's about not trying to multitask. So when you're drinking a cup of coffee, or when you're speaking with one of your kids, or having a great conversation with a colleague, slow down, notice it. Notice that sensation of interest, or that sensation of being inspired by somebody else, or notice the joy that you're getting from enjoying whatever it is that's happening in that moment. So some of you may use the term mindful, about being mindful to things, about taking things a step at a time, about slowing down, whereas most of us are on this kind of treadmill constantly. So noticing and savouring is going to be really, really important. Now, the research shows us that actually it's not the big things in our lives, the intensity of those positive emotions that produce the neurotransmitters that are good for us. It's the frequency of feeling good, of feeling interested, of feeling amused. So actually it's the small everyday things that probably happen to lots of us. We're so busy, or we're so worried that we fail to notice them. So there's a trick in learning to do that kind of noticing and savouring all the little things that happen as we live our days. And if possible, noticing them at the time, because that stimulates the neurotransmitters. But if you're not able to do that as effectively as you like to do, there are little things that you can do to build in reflection points during the day. So when you stop for your lunch, when you are eating a sandwich, instead of having a sandwich in one hand and your mobile phone in the other, going through your messages and checking the latest news feeds, leave your phone somewhere else and just focus on the sandwich and just reflect back on what's gone on in your morning, where you have felt good and where you have had good conversations and when you have been able to fix or resolve things or dealt with an email that's been particularly troubling you. So when we stop and reflect, we actually get the neurotransmitters by reflection as much as at the time. So there's a thing about building in some reflection time. And Fredrickson talks about gratitude diaries, and some of you may keep gratitude diaries. Small notebook beside your bed, just before you go to sleep at night, even in these difficult days, taking the opportunity to reflect back on the day. What's gone well for me today? What have I enjoyed about today? What's been good about today? What's made me happy today? Even if it's the simplest thing of your dog's tail wagging, it really doesn't matter. Making a note of those things helps us to release those 3 good neurotransmitters. You do it just before bed, you're likely to get better sleep as well. Now, the whole thing here is it's not a one-off activity. You can't just do it once and think job done. You have to keep doing it. So we have to build in things during our days where we're, I want to say forcing ourselves, but that's a bit harsh, encouraging ourselves to reflect and be proactive about feeling good and noticing the good stuff. So a bit like when we go to the gym, I'm told, and some of you actually do this, but I'm told if I went to the gym and I regularly did bicep curls with weights, repetitively, with the resistance of the weights, I could change the shape of my biceps. I'm afraid I choose to wear long sleeves. It's just easier. Bit lazy. But you know, and I know, that if you repetitively exercise particular muscles with resistance, you can change their shape. Well, it's exactly the same with our brain patterns. If you choose to do repetitive exercises to boost your production of those 3 good neurotransmitters, over time, with resistance, you will change the neuroplasticity of your brain. So you will start naturally to produce more of those 3 good neurotransmitters. Now, if I went to the gym and did 1 bicep curl, not a great deal's going to shift and not a great deal's going to change. So what I need to learn to do is to do it repetitively. So for example, if you do keep a note felt during the day, all those good emotions that you've tracked and felt, then actually if you do that repetitively with resistance, well, what's the resistance? At the gym, it's the weights. For us, it's our cynicism. It's the, why am I doing this? This is a bit of a waste of time. I can't see this making any difference. Well, if you get through that resistance and you practice these kind of activities, gratitude diary, auditing your day, thinking about the good stuff regularly, you will change the neuroplasticity of your brain. But you have to do it regularly. It's exactly the same as going to the gym. One-offs don't do it. You have to keep at it and keep doing it. Now, here's some ideas of how you can help fuel positive emotions. And this isn't mine, I've stolen it from somebody else. It's free share. It's a useful kind of document that shows you the kinds of things that you can do fairly regularly to do lots more physical kind of exercise, even if it's in the constraints of your own home. Lots of things that you can do. Acts of kindness for other people. Just at the moment, there are loads of opportunities for us to do that for neighbours and colleagues. I think there's also another huge one, which is about noticing and thanking and appreciating others and actually taking the time to tell them. So actually not just feeling grateful to somebody, but telling them why you're grateful to them. All of these kind of things can help us boost those 3 good neurotransmitters. Now, I mentioned as well, not only do we produce good stuff when we're feeling upbeat, engaged, short and happy, but our bodies also produce a more difficult chemical called cortisol when we're worried and anxious. Just at the moment, quite a lot of us are likely to be producing more cortisol than we would do normally. So how do we cut our cortisol? Well, here's some useful ideas to think about. The getting good sleep, easy for me to say that, because just at the moment lots of people are finding it difficult to sleep. But there are things you can do proactively in that territory. Practicing mindfulness just before you go to sleep, downloading and using some of the really useful apps that are around to help you with sleep and to relax. Exercising definitely helps because it produces lots more dopamine for you. Having fun, remembering to laugh and joke, all the board games you can get out and have fun with your kids. Twister's an old favourite. Get it out, have a go. All this stuff about maintaining healthy relationships. Going to be more difficult as we get locked down with each other. But just noticing and appreciating other people around us. In fact, taking care of a pet, whether it's a hamster, a gerbil, a dog, whatever it is, when we stroke things, we produce lots of oxytocin. So having more go at that. And when I'm saying tending to spirituality, I don't in any sense mean anything religious. Some of you may have a religious or a spiritual aspect to your life, a creed that you can call on in these difficult times. Lots of us don't. It doesn't mean that we can't recognise those beautiful sunrises, sunsets, noticing the blue sky and the trees and the birds. So being more spiritual and taking notice of things that give us that inner sense of goodness. And eating healthy foods might be more difficult at the moment, but we can try and do that as best as possible. And all of these things reduce our cortisol, as well as boosting those good, positive emotions. Now, I hope that's been helpful. It's a very big race, quick race through lots of stuff. We could spend more time on some of this. How do you develop more gratitude? How do we focus on meaning and purpose? All of those sorts of things. But in the short term, here are some things that I would suggest would be very helpful in this territory. We need to set a media diet. Try not to be constantly focused on the phone and on the media feeds. Choose times during the day to check in so you can keep up to date with the latest advice. And please move away from that constant stream of negativity. Where possible, keep to a routine. Even those of you who are working from home, I noticed some of you have started to have a commute to work. So getting out and about for 10 minutes before you log on, as if you were doing your natural commute to work. So keeping that routine, building in breaks, sticking to a lunchtime, etc., etc. Staying connected with other people in a positive sense, probably distance. Obviously, the sleep's really important. The whole thing about exercise and moving doesn't have to be going to the gym. There's lots we can do, moving to keep ourselves safe. And all that stuff about noticing and saving the small positive moments. Practicing acts of kindness, lots of opportunities for that. And this whole thing about thanking others. And one last little point I'd make is there's a whole thing at the moment about trying to keep ourselves more stable. We're living with these multiple unknowns, the complexity of everything, the threats that are around, and the unpredictability of things. And there's something about really being clear about what's very important to us and honing in on your stability zones. And I would suggest that most of you have probably got a stability zone as the screensaver on your phone. Most of you, the screensaver on your phone is likely to be a picture of a loved one, a picture of pets. Some of us have a bit of a turmoil there. Dog, husband. Get a picture of them both together, it's probably best. But your screensaver, whether it's of a holiday picture of somewhere where you felt really good, or a picture of a place you really like to go, our screensavers in this space can be really helpful. Because when you feel yourself starting to be overwhelmed, to catastrophise, just click your phone, see that screensaver, and it reminds you of the perspective of what's really important to you during all of this uncertainty, focusing on those things that are in your life and that are important to you. So get a stability zone on your phone if you haven't got one, because it can really make a difference to the production of those good neurotransmitters. I hope that's been helpful, hope it's been useful. If anybody wants to contact me, happy to direct message. Those of you who follow me on Twitter, I'll be tweeting more about this in the territory over the coming days. But I hope it's been useful. Keep safe, look after one another. Thanks for listening.
That was really great, Rene. Thank you. Really enjoyed listening to you there, and lots to reflect upon. If everybody else listening got something else that you need at the moment. So a huge thank you to Rene. And if anyone listening has any ideas of potential interviews, tips that you can share, please do get in touch with me either on Twitter or by email. We'd love to hear from you. So keep well, keep learning, keep reading. Take care. Bye, folks.